Picture a licensed, state-legal business owner pulling up to a federal Internal Revenue Service office on a weekday morning. He is flanked by armed guards, carrying a heavy canvas duffel bag packed with $300,000 in crumpled $20 bills. He is not bribing a politician, and he is not paying off a cartel. He is just paying his quarterly federal income taxes. And here is the truly bizarre part. The federal government will actually hit him with a financial penalty if he tries to pay electronically. Welcome to the reality of the American cannabis industry, a $29 billion market where almost 73% of businesses fail to turn a profit. You probably walk past a sleek dispensary with a line out the door and assume the owner is swimming in cash by selling premium weed. But I am here to tell you that the plant this business is named after is not how it actually makes money. In fact, if you try to make your living simply by selling marijuana, you will almost certainly go bankrupt. Owning a dispensary is actually a high-stakes tax mitigation and commercial real estate game in disguise. And to understand why the person selling the most popular green plant in America is currently drowning in red ink, we have to travel back to 1981 to meet a convicted cocaine trafficker named Jeffrey Edmondson. Keep that name in mind, because Jeffrey is the accidental supervillain of this entire industry. And by the end of this story, you will see how his smug courtroom grin created the exact mechanism that decides who gets rich and who gets ruined in legal cannabis today. But before we meet our cocaine dealer, let us look at the price of admission. If you want to open a dispensary, your startup costs come in 3 sizes. And every single tier has a hidden financial trap that nobody budgets for. Let us start with Tier 1, the small independent operator. You want to open a modest, one-bay neighborhood storefront or a delivery-only setup. You budget $50,000 to $250,000 for your local license, a security vault, a few glass display cases, and your first batch of inventory. Sounds reasonable, right? But here is the hidden cost that shocks small operators the moment they open their doors. Cash logistics. Because marijuana is still classified as a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law, putting it in the exact same legal category as heroin and LSD, the federal government views any money generated by it as illicit drug proceeds. As a result, almost no major bank in America will legally let you open a simple checking account. That means you are running a multi-million-dollar retail business entirely in cash. You have to pay your employees in cash, hire armored transport trucks just to move your revenue around, and pay conversion fees whenever you need cashier's checks. Small owners routinely burn over $1,200 a month just on armored cars, vaults, and armed security before they even sell a single gram of flower. But let us say you have more capital and you want to step up to Tier 2, the mid-sized regional operator. You want to build a sleek, branded storefront in a competitive market like Illinois or New York. You budget $1 million to $3 million for prime real estate, architectural buildouts, and state-of-the-art surveillance systems. But your hidden trap here is not the banks. It is the state bureaucracy. Regulators will happily drain your bank account before your shop even exists. In Illinois, for example, the state charges a non-refundable application fee of $750,000 just for the permission to apply for a dispensary license. Translation, you hand the government $750,000 just to put your name in the lottery, and if they reject your application, they keep the money. And while you wait 12 to 18 months for state inspectors to approve your paperwork, local laws usually require you to already have your physical building secured. That means you are paying monthly commercial rent on an empty, locked storefront for over a year with zero incoming revenue. So, if the small and mid-sized operators get eaten alive by cash handling and bureaucratic waiting rooms, what about Tier 3? What if you are a mega-scale multi-state operator, an MSO like Curaleaf or Trulieve, companies that generate over $1 billion a year in revenue? These giants spend $50 million or more to enter a new state market. Surely their massive scale protects them, right? Not quite. Because interstate commerce is strictly illegal under federal law, you cannot grow your cannabis in a sunny, cheap agricultural state like California or Oregon and ship it across state lines to sell in New York. These corporate giants are forced to build an entirely separate duplicated supply chain, complete with expensive indoor cultivation farms, processing labs, and retail networks, inside every single state they operate in. It is an operational nightmare of redundant overhead, yet despite all those duplicated costs, these billion-dollar conglomerates are surviving while local mom-and-pop dispensaries are shutting down in droves. Why? Because the corporate giants understand the hidden mechanism. And that brings us right to our master secret. You think you are running a retail store that sells cannabis, but you are actually running a tax mitigation firm that uses weed as bait. The monster forcing you to do this is a 44-year-old paragraph in the Internal Revenue Code called Section 280E. Remember our friend Jeffrey Edmondson from 1981? Jeffrey was a Minneapolis drug dealer who got busted trafficking cocaine, amphetamines, and marijuana. When tax season rolled around, Jeffrey took the Internal Revenue Service to federal tax court. He argued that even though his business was illegal, he was still an American taxpayer, and therefore he should be allowed to deduct his ordinary business expenses. He deducted the cost of his small bathroom scale, his packaging baggies, his telephone bill, and even a portion of his apartment rent as a home office. And believe it or not, the tax court judge agreed with him. The court ruled that under the law, ordinary business expenses were fully deductible, no matter what product you were selling. Congress lost its collective mind. Lawmakers panicked at the headline of cocaine cartels getting tax write-offs. So in 1982, they hastily passed Section 280E. This law states that any business trafficking in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 controlled substances is strictly forbidden from taking standard tax deductions or credits. Let us translate what that legal jargon actually means for your wallet. In a normal retail business, like a clothing boutique or a restaurant, you take your total sales revenue, subtract the cost of the goods you sold, and then subtract all of your operating expenses. Your monthly rent, your employee salaries, your electricity bill, your marketing, and your security. You only pay federal income tax on your net profit, which is the small pool of money left over at the very end. But under Section 280E, the federal government says a cannabis dispensary is only allowed to deduct the cost of goods sold. That is just the wholesale price of the actual marijuana plant and its packaging. You are legally barred from deducting your store rent, your bud tender wages, your security guards, your insurance premiums, or your utility bills. That means you are taxed on your gross profit, not your net profit. Let us look at simple math to hear how brutal this really is. Imagine your neighborhood dispensary does $1 million in sales this year. It cost them $400,000 to buy the wholesale cannabis, leaving them with $600,000 in gross profit. Now imagine they spent $400,000 on store rent, employee payroll, and security guards. In the real world, that business made $200,000 in actual net profit. But when tax day arrives, the Internal Revenue Service pretends those operating costs do not exist. They tax the dispensary on the full $600,000 of gross profit. Between federal and state corporate tax rates, that tax bill can easily hit $150,000. Your actual take-home profit of $200,000 is instantly slashed down to $50,000 or less. That is an effective federal tax rate of 50 to 70% on your actual earnings. In documented cases across the country, dispensaries with booming lines out the door owe more money in federal taxes than they even have in their bank accounts, turning a successful store into a loss-making charity by accident. So how does anyone survive this? How do the big multi-state operators make millions of dollars if selling the plant triggers a fatal tax bomb? By pivoting away from the weed. The survivors treat the dispensary itself as a loss leader, exactly like a movie theater uses ticket sales just to get you inside the building so they can sell you a $10 bucket of popcorn. In cannabis, the secret popcorn is commercial real estate and corporate structuring. Here is the clever mechanism the top operators use. They create two entirely separate corporate entities. Entity number one is a real estate holding company that does not touch a single gram of marijuana. Entity number two is the actual retail dispensary that touches the plant and sells it to the public. The real estate company buys the building and then leases that storefront to its own dispensary at an enormously inflated rent. If fair market rent for the building is $10,000 a month, the holding company might charge the dispensary $30,000 a month. Why would they intentionally overcharge themselves? Because the real estate holding company is not trafficking a Schedule 1 drug. It is just a standard commercial landlord. The rental income it collects is taxed at normal, low corporate rates, and the landlord gets to deduct every single property expense, building depreciation, and maintenance cost. Meanwhile, on the dispensary side of the ledger, all that inflated rent drains its paper profits down to zero, meaning it has virtually no gross income left for Section 280E to penalize. The plant on the shelf is nothing more than bait to generate foot traffic and pay tax-sheltered rent to the landlord. If you own a dispensary today, you are not really a cannabis merchant. You are a commercial real estate tycoon who uses decriminalized drug sales as a tax shelter. But what happens when an operator forgets this fundamental rule? What happens when someone actually believes the hype, falls in love with the retail branding, and tries to build a traditional business around selling weed? Let me tell you the tragic story of MedMen Enterprises. Back in 2018, MedMen was the undisputed darling of the legal cannabis world. They explicitly branded themselves as the Apple Store of weed. They hired former Apple retail architects to design high-end, glossy stores featuring custom wood tables, glowing display cases, and interactive iPads for browsing strains. They launched a massive advertising campaign directed by Hollywood filmmaker Spike Jonze, opened a massive flagship store on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and secured celebrity endorsements from mainstream stars. When MedMen went public on the Canadian Securities Exchange in 2018, investors lost their minds, driving the company's valuation to a staggering $1.6 billion. They announced a grand plan to open over 1,000 premium stores across the country. But while the executives were busy flying on private jets and hosting luxury launch parties, a ticking financial clock had started. Because MedMen was expanding through high-overhead premium retail storefronts, their monthly operating costs were astronomical. And because they operated as a single corporate entity owning all that retail space, almost none of those expensive Fifth Avenue rents, iPad displays, or celebrity advertising campaigns could be deducted on their tax returns. Section 280E swallowed them whole. The math caught up with them at breathtaking speed. By 2019, just 1 year after their billion-dollar initial public offering, MedMen was bleeding cash, reporting operating losses that exceeded $100 million every single quarter. Let that sink in. $100 million burned every 3 months. As the clock ticked into 2021, the company defaulted on $160 million in debt. They could no longer pay their product vendors, their stock plummeted from $8 a share down to literal pennies, and they began abandoning storefronts across the country. In federal court documents, former executives admitted the devastating truth. The federal tax structure consumed their gross margins entirely. By April 2024, exactly 4 years after their operational crisis took hold, the Apple store of weed filed for bankruptcy protection and completely collapsed, leaving shareholders with nothing. The structural lesson of MedMen is absolute and unforgiving. You cannot outbrand a 70% effective tax rate. High overhead retail theater is a death sentence under federal drug laws. And that brings our story right back to where we started, with our 1981 cocaine dealer, Jeffrey Edmondson. Jeffrey died years ago, but his accidental legacy is the reason why your neighborhood dispensary charges $60 for a small container of flour. It is not corporate greed. It is desperate survival against an internal revenue code that treats state-licensed shop owners like 1980s cartel bosses. Why are 73% of cannabis businesses currently failing or barely breaking even? Because they are trying to run a normal retail store in an industry where the normal rules of arithmetic do not apply. The winners in this game are not the people with the coolest branding or the most potent plant. They are the masterminds with the best cost accounting lawyers, the ones who understand that the real money sits in the concrete building, the cash vaults, and the corporate tax structures. The plant was never the business. The tax shelter is. And speaking of businesses where the thing on the sign is just a distraction from how the money is really made, you will not believe what is happening down at your local gas station. Spoiler alert, they barely make a dime on the gasoline. Trust me, that story is even wilder. So I will see you over there.